The sun was barely rising over the dry, dusty plains of Arizona when an uneasy hush settled over the small crowd gathered by the old ranch's fence. Everyone had come with a sense of curiosity, tinged with amusement. Some leaned on their trucks, arms crossed, smirks barely hiding their skepticism. After all, it wasn't every day you saw an elderly man attempting to tame a wild horse that had terrorized the countryside for months. The horse, a magnificent black stallion with a jagged white stripe across his nose, stood in the center of the pen, muscles coiled like springs ready to explode. His nostrils flared, eyes darting from person to person. He was known as Shadow, a name whispered with equal parts fear and awe. Rumors said he'd tossed a dozen riders in the past year, breaking fences and sending terrified onlookers scrambling. And now, the locals were betting that this old rancher, barely able to lift a feed bucket without wincing, would be humiliated just like the rest. But the rancher, Mr. Elias Thompson, didn't flinch. His weathered hands rested calmly on the worn leather reins he carried, his gray beard catching the first golden rays of morning. The crowd snickered. "He's too old," someone muttered. "That horse will eat him alive." Another laughed so hard he doubled over, spilling his coffee. Elias just stood there, silent, taking in the scene with a quiet intensity that made the whispers around him feel almost ridiculous. This wasn't just a horse for him, it was a test, a redemption. Years ago, Elias had lost everything: his family, his fortune, even his own confidence after a tragic accident left him partially disabled. The ranch, now inherited from his late brother, was a shadow of its former glory. Horses ran wild, fences rotted, and creditors circled like vultures. Yet there he was, in the pen, heart hammering, knowing that taming Shadow might just save his ranch and restore his sense of purpose. Shadow snorted, a cloud of dust swirling around his hooves. He pawed at the ground, eyes never leaving Elias. Every muscle in the stallion's body screamed danger. To the untrained eye, it looked like sheer chaos waiting to erupt. But Elias had studied this horse for months, understanding his patterns, his triggers, even the small flick of his ears that signaled a change in mood. The first step was patience. Every false move, every hasty approach, could trigger a full-on stampede. Yet the crowd wanted action, not patience. Murmurs grew louder. "Come on, old man, show us something," someone jeered. But Elias ignored them. His world had shrunk to just him and Shadow. No snickers, no doubters, just the raw, tense energy between man and horse. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch of oats, the scent drifting into the air like a silent invitation. Shadow's ears flicked, curiosity piercing his wariness. Elias slowly extended his hand, every movement deliberate, every step measured. To an outsider, it might have looked like a dangerous dance, man inching closer to a living force of nature. To Elias, it was a conversation. Every twitch, every breath, every flick of Shadow's tail was a word he understood. The crowd gasped as Shadow suddenly bolted toward the fence, hooves pounding, eyes wild. "I told you," someone shouted, "he's done for." But Elias didn't move. He let the horse run, letting him expend some of his pent-up energy. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward again. Each step was a statement: "I will not back down." The horse, muscles still coiled, paused at the edge of the pen, nostrils flaring, and their eyes locked. In that tense heartbeat, the entire world seemed to narrow down to just these two souls, each measuring the other's resolve. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed, one of the old fence posts splitting under Shadow's hoof. The crowd jumped back. A woman gasped. Children squealed. And Elias, calm as ever, did something remarkable: he didn't panic. He simply adjusted his stance, whispered something soft and low, and the horse paused mid-stride, ears twitching. That single, subtle sound, almost imperceptible to the human ear, was enough to hold Shadow's attention. It was in that split second that the crowd began to notice something they hadn't expected. This wasn't going to be another humiliating failure. There was a rhythm forming, a silent communication, a connection that no one had thought possible. Whispers turned to murmurs of intrigue. Some faces softened. Some even leaned forward, unwilling to miss a moment of what seemed like a miracle in slow motion. Elias's approach wasn't about brute strength, it was about understanding. Shadow had been abandoned, mistreated, feared by everyone. But Elias had a history of seeing beyond the chaos, of reaching into a horse's deepest mistrust and pulling out trust, step by careful step. As he extended his hand once more, this time with gentleness, the stallion's eyes softened slightly, and the crowd leaned closer. Heartbeats raced. Cameras clicked. In that tense, dusty morning air, it felt like time had slowed. Every movement mattered. Every breath was a gamble. And as Elias took another careful step toward Shadow, he murmured, almost to himself, "It's okay, old friend. I've got you." No one in the crowd expected what happened next. A small, tentative step forward from Shadow, nose sniffing Elias's outstretched hand. Gasps swept through the crowd. Laughter turned into whispers of disbelief. And just like that, the impossible began to take shape. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dusty pen, yet the tension between man and horse felt heavier than the midday heat. Shadow's eyes never left Elias, nostrils flaring, muscles tense, ready to spring into chaos at the slightest provocation. The crowd, now quiet with suspense, could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Some whispered excitedly, others still clung to skepticism, but every heart was quietly captivated. Elias knew better than to rush. Shadow was unpredictable. Every flick of his tail, every shift of weight could signal danger. And yet, there was a faint glimmer of curiosity in the stallion's gaze, a fragile spark of trust that demanded careful nurturing. Elias crouched slightly, keeping his movements slow, steady, and deliberate. He extended his hand again, the oats glinting softly in the sunlight, like a peace offering. Shadow stepped forward, then abruptly reared, hooves striking the air, eyes wild. Gasps rose from the crowd. Someone whispered, "He's going to get thrown again." Another murmured, "This is insane. That horse will kill him." But Elias didn't flinch. Calmness radiated from him like a shield. He spoke softly, almost like a lullaby, words meant not for the audience, but for the horse. "Easy, boy. It's okay. Just slow." Shadow pawed the ground, his powerful body trembling with nervous energy, then slowly lowered his head. That hesitation, the pause between chaos and trust, was everything. As the minutes stretched into an hour, the pen became a stage of psychological warfare. Shadow would advance a few steps, then retreat, testing Elias with every instinct he had. The crowd could barely keep up. One moment, the horse's ears flicked forward, signaling curiosity. The next, they pinned back in warning. One second, Shadow approached the oats, and the next, he would spin and stomp, reminding everyone of his raw, untamed power. Through it all, Elias remained steady. Every step he took was measured, every tone of his voice controlled, every motion a calculated signal of safety. He remembered the lessons of his past, the mistakes that had cost him his family, his confidence, his livelihood, and let them guide him now. Shadow wasn't just a horse. He was a mirror, reflecting Elias's own fears, his own resilience, and his willingness to believe in the impossible. The pen itself seemed to transform into a battlefield of trust. Each side knew that any misstep could ignite chaos, but Elias pressed forward, letting Shadow test him, letting the stallion assert dominance, and patiently responding with understanding rather than fear. The crowd watched, spellbound. Some children whispered encouragement, sensing the fragile bond forming. Some adults shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to admire or scoff. And yet, the tension was undeniable. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Hours passed, each moment layered with suspense. Elias moved closer, each step a negotiation, each breath a promise. Shadow's initial resistance, rearing, pawing, snorting, softened ever so slightly. Elias spoke to him, telling stories of his youth, of mistakes made and lessons learned. Somehow, the words carried beyond human comprehension. The horse, muscles quivering, head lowered, began to respond, recognizing not a threat, but a partner. Then, just when the crowd began to think progress was impossible, a sudden surprise jolted everyone. Shadow bolted, not at Elias, but toward a section of the fence that had been damaged earlier in the week. The crowd held its breath as the massive stallion struck the wood with his shoulder, splinters flying. For a second, chaos erupted, the horse's wild instinct, the danger of broken fence posts, the potential disaster all collided. But Elias, without hesitation, stepped into the path of danger. He didn't shout. He didn't panic. He simply extended his arm, voice calm, firm, commanding yet soothing. "Easy, easy, boy. I've got you." The words seemed to have a magic all their own. Shadow paused, inches from the broken fence. His breath came in rapid bursts. His muscles twitched with tension. And then, with a flick of his ears and a tentative step backward, the stallion yielded. A ripple of astonishment ran through the crowd. Even the harshest critics had to admit, something remarkable was happening here. Elias had not only survived Shadow's test, but had begun to earn the horse's trust in a way that no one thought possible. Slowly, deliberately, he guided Shadow back toward the center of the pen. The stallion, still wary but visibly calmer, began to follow. Every hoofstep was a testament to patience, understanding, and an unspoken bond that had formed between man and beast. The crowd, initially mocking, now watched in silence. Eyes widened. Phones were raised to capture the unfolding miracle. The narrative they had come to mock was being rewritten before their very eyes. And amid the tension, a subtle psychological drama played out. Every viewer felt empathy for the horse's fear, or at Elias's courage, and a mounting wonder at the delicate dance of trust and understanding. Then came a small, almost imperceptible twist. As Elias reached for the reins, Shadow hesitated, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was consideration. He stepped closer, nudging Elias's hand gently with his nose. The crowd exhaled in collective disbelief. Children's eyes sparkled. Adults whispered, "I can't believe this." For the first time, Shadow had acknowledged Elias not as a threat, but as a guide, a partner, a friend. But the drama wasn't over. Just as the moment seemed triumphant, a sudden, unexpected sound, a loose metal gate swinging in the wind, spooked Shadow. He reared again, hooves striking the dirt, and the audience gasped. Chaos threatened to erupt. Yet Elias, drawing on every ounce of experience, every lesson learned from years of struggle, didn't panic. With calm, deliberate movement, he adjusted his stance, whispered reassurances, and held his ground. Shadow's panic slowly subsided. In that heart-pounding moment, the emotional depth of the story was undeniable. Elias wasn't just taming a horse, he was confronting his own fears, his own past failures, his own sense of helplessness. And Shadow wasn't just resisting a human, he was recovering from mistrust, trauma, and instinctive fear. Together, they were rewriting the narrative, moment by moment, hoof by patient hoof. By the time the sun had climbed high into the sky, the stallion was no longer lunging wildly. He remained cautious, but he had stopped striking, stopped spinning, and even lowered his head to accept Elias's touch. The crowd, now a mixture of awe, disbelief, and admiration, began to whisper in unison. For some, the spectacle was a lesson in courage. For others, it was a reminder of the profound connection that could exist between humans and horses. Elias took a deep breath. Sweat ran down his face, but a quiet, unshakable confidence shone in his eyes. He knew the real work was just beginning. Trust had been initiated, but it was fragile, delicate, and would need constant nurturing. And yet, in this first day's conflict, the impossible had begun to take shape. Shadow was no longer a creature of pure chaos, he was a partner in a story of redemption, resilience, and unexpected triumph. As the crowd began to disperse, some in stunned silence, others whispering excitedly, Elias looked down at the stallion and smiled. "We're just getting started, old friend." And in that smile, Shadow seemed to recognize a promise: patience, understanding, and unwavering courage. The afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the ranch, illuminating dust motes that danced in the warm breeze. The pen, which had once felt like a battlefield, now carried a strange sense of anticipation. Shadow's muscles no longer trembled with pure panic. Instead, they hummed with alert curiosity. Every twitch of his ears, every flick of his tail, spoke of a cautious interest, a willingness to engage. Elias knew that this was the fragile moment where patience and courage would either forge a bond or shatter everything. The old rancher's heart pounded, but he stood steady, calm as the desert sky. He knelt on one knee, extending his palm with a small handful of oats, letting the stallion approach on his own terms. Shadow hesitated, nostrils flaring, eyes scanning the pen for threats, but Elias's stillness, his quiet confidence, drew him closer. Suddenly, Shadow bolted, fast, almost violently, toward the far corner of the pen where the old water trough had cracked. The crowd, still lingering at the edge, gasped. Some whispered, "He's lost control." Others shook their heads in disbelief. But Elias didn't flinch. He let Shadow run, giving the stallion space to release the pent-up energy that had been building for months, perhaps years. When Shadow paused, head down, nostrils flaring, Elias stepped forward slowly. "It's okay," he murmured, voice soft but firm. "I'm right here. No one's going to hurt you." Shadow's eyes flicked to him, wariness still there but tinged with curiosity. He took a hesitant step, then another, each movement deliberate, each a quiet negotiation of trust. It was in this moment that the crowd began to truly understand. Elias was not just taming a horse, he was connecting with a soul that had been broken by fear, by neglect, by life itself. And in return, the horse was teaching Elias something profound: resilience, patience, and the quiet power of unwavering trust. Hours stretched into evening. Elias walked slowly beside Shadow, hand on the reins, speaking softly. Every sound, every whisper, every step carried reassurance. The stallion's muscles gradually relaxed. His snorts of panic became soft huffs of curiosity. And then, for the first time, he nudged Elias's hand with his nose, not aggressively, not fearfully, but gently, a gesture that felt almost human in its subtlety. The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others wiping away tears they hadn't realized were forming. They had come expecting mockery, chaos, perhaps a disaster, but instead, they witnessed something far more powerful, a fragile, miraculous connection forming before their eyes. But the narrative wasn't done twisting yet. Just as Elias began to sense progress, a sudden challenge arose. A loose board on the fence squealed as the wind picked up, startling Shadow. The stallion reared, hooves striking the ground, nostrils flaring. The crowd held its breath. The danger was real. But Elias, drawing on every experience, every lesson, every ounce of patience, didn't panic. Instead, he froze, stance grounded, voice calm, eyes locked on Shadow. "It's okay, just breathe," he whispered. And miraculously, Shadow listened. Step by step, the stallion calmed, settling back to the pen's center. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, but in quiet, awe-filled applause. They were witnessing the impossible, a wild horse, feared by all, accepting guidance from a man whom many had dismissed as too old, too fragile, too inexperienced. The breakthrough came quietly. Shadow lowered his head completely, allowing Elias to run his hand along his neck. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. For the first time, the stallion had voluntarily submitted, not out of fear, but trust. It was a small gesture, but monumental in meaning. Every observer felt it, the silent poetry of patience meeting courage, of empathy meeting instinct, of human and horse forming an unbreakable bond. As the sun dipped closer to the horizon, casting a fiery glow over the ranch, Elias led Shadow around the pen. Step by step, the stallion followed, each movement smoother than the last. The bond was growing, fragile yet undeniable. And with every gentle touch, every quiet whisper, the old rancher proved something profound, not just to the horse, not just to the crowd, but to himself. He was capable of miracles, capable of redemption, capable of reclaiming the life he thought he had lost. But Elias also knew this was only the beginning. Trust was delicate. One misstep could undo everything. The stallion's wild spirit would always test him. And yet, in that golden light, with Shadow's head leaning slightly against his shoulder, Elias felt a surge of hope unlike anything he had known in years. He understood now that taming a horse wasn't about control, it was about mutual respect, understanding, and unwavering patience. The crowd, now completely silent, had been transformed. The mocking whispers of the morning were gone. In their place was wonder, empathy, and disbelief. Children's eyes widened with excitement. Adults shook their heads, murmuring about the courage and calm of the elderly rancher. Even the skeptics had to admit it, something extraordinary was happening. something that would be remembered for years. Elias knelt beside Shadow once more, murmuring encouragement. "You're safe now, boy. I promise." The stallion, once a creature of raw fear and untamed energy, leaned gently against him. And in that quiet, breathtaking moment, the impossible became real. Trust had been earned. A bond had been forged. And the first steps of redemption were complete. Before the crowd could fully grasp it, Elias stood, hand on Shadow's flank, looking out across the pen. He knew tomorrow would bring more tests, more challenges, more moments of fear. But for now, he allowed himself a small smile. They had taken the first steps toward something miraculous. And the story, his story, Shadow's story, was only beginning. The next morning arrived with a sharp, cold wind whipping across the ranch. The pen, now quiet in comparison to the chaos of the previous days, seemed almost too calm. Shadow stood in the corner, muscles taut, eyes alert. The crowd, larger than before, had returned, drawn by whispers of the miracle horse tamer and his impossible connection with a once unruly stallion. Some came skeptical, some curious, but all watched intently. Elias felt the weight of expectation pressing on him. Every step he had taken to this point had led here, and yet the ultimate test was not just about taming the horse, it was about proving that the bond they had built could withstand true danger. He tightened the leather reins in his calloused hands and approached Shadow slowly, speaking softly. "We're ready, old friend. But you have to trust me now." Shadow's ears flicked back, a signal of caution, but he did not bolt. Elias's heart raced. He knew that the horse's fear could ignite at any second. One wrong move, one sudden noise, could shatter everything they had built. And yet, Elias felt something shift inside him, a calm confidence born not of arrogance, but of experience, of patience, and of the unspoken connection that now tied him to Shadow. Suddenly, a loud clatter rang out from the far side of the pen. A stray piece of metal, loosened by the wind, fell to the ground. Shadow reared violently, hooves striking the earth, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with panic. The crowd gasped, stepping back in alarm. For a moment, it seemed all the progress of the last days might vanish in a heartbeat. But Elias did not flinch. He planted his feet firmly, raised his arms slowly, and whispered a gentle command. "It's okay, stay with me." The stallion froze mid-stride, muscles quivering, then slowly lowered his head, eyes locked on Elias's. The crowd held its breath, realizing that this quiet, deliberate man was not just controlling the situation, he was connecting with the horse on a level deeper than fear or obedience. This was the defining moment. Elias led Shadow toward a narrow section of the pen that had been damaged by previous storms, a place the horse had always avoided. Every step was tense, every movement calculated. The audience leaned forward, silent, hearts pounding, cameras raised to capture the unfolding miracle. It was as if time had slowed, each second stretching into eternity. Shadow hesitated at the edge of the damaged fence. His powerful body trembled. Elias knelt slightly, speaking softly, his voice a lifeline. "You can do this. I'm right here. I promise." And then, something extraordinary happened. The stallion stepped forward, cautiously at first, then with more confidence, following Elias's lead. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, but in quiet awe. Some gasped aloud, some whispered prayers of disbelief. Just as hope seemed assured, Shadow bolted, not in panic this time, but instinctively, testing Elias's courage. The old rancher held his ground, running alongside the stallion, voice calm, eyes focused, reins in hand. Step by step, he guided Shadow around the pen, navigating broken fences, loose boards, and unpredictable terrain. It was a delicate dance, a symphony of trust and courage that left the audience mesmerized. And then, in a moment that would be etched in memory, Shadow stopped completely. He lowered his head, leaned gently against Elias, and allowed the man to guide him through the pen. The crowd erupted, clapping, cheering, some even crying. The impossible had been achieved. The wild, feared stallion had fully accepted the guidance of a man whom many had dismissed as too old, too frail, too ordinary to succeed. The dramatic tension didn't end there. A young girl from the crowd, eyes wide with excitement, called out, "Can I pet him?" The stallion flicked his ears, testing boundaries, but Elias knelt and whispered encouragement. Slowly, Shadow stepped toward her, nose sniffing her hand, before nudging her gently. Gasps and cheers echoed across the pen as the girl's eyes lit up with pure wonder. Elias smiled, a mixture of relief and pride washing over him. He had not just tamed a horse, he had proven the power of patience, empathy, and courage. Shadow, once a creature of fear and mistrust, now radiated calm confidence, reflecting the bond that had been carefully nurtured over days of tension, suspense, and mutual respect. In that climactic moment, the story reached its emotional peak. The crowd, initially mocking, now witnessed something rare and beautiful: redemption, triumph, and a connection that transcended words. Cameras flashed, phones recorded every second, and whispers of awe spread through the audience. Children's eyes sparkled, adults shook their heads, and even the skeptics had to admit they had been wrong. The old rancher had indeed achieved the impossible. Elias patted Shadow's neck gently, feeling the warmth and strength of the stallion beneath his hand. "We did it," he whispered. "Together." And in that moment, the bond between man and horse was undeniable, a testament to patience, courage, and unwavering trust. But even as the crowd cheered and the sun dipped lower on the horizon, Elias knew the real lesson wasn't just about taming a horse. It was about life itself, the importance of persistence in the face of doubt, the power of empathy to bridge fear, and the courage to trust, even when the world expects you to fail. Shadow had been the catalyst, the mirror, and the teacher. And Elias had risen, not just as a rancher, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. The sun had begun its slow descent, painting the Arizona sky in hues of orange and gold. Shadows stretched long across the ranch, but nothing could overshadow the extraordinary scene unfolding in the pen. Elias stood tall beside Shadow, now calm, confident, and trusting in a way the crowd had never imagined. The air was thick with emotion, pride, awe, and an unspoken reverence for the bond they had forged. The once skeptical onlookers could hardly believe what they had witnessed. Morning laughter and mockery had completely vanished. Instead, silence and whispers of disbelief dominated the atmosphere. Adults exchanged glances, muttering words like, "I never thought he actually did it." Children's faces glowed with wonder, some stepping closer, hesitant but hopeful, sensing the pure connection between human and horse. Elias ran his hands over Shadow's sleek coat, feeling the powerful muscles under his fingertips. The stallion nuzzled him gently, leaning into the touch, a gesture that carried a weight far greater than words. It was a sign of complete trust, a silent acknowledgement that they had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty together, and come out stronger. For Elias, the moment was more than just about the horse. It was a personal triumph over decades of loss, doubt, and hardship. The ranch that had seemed on the verge of collapse now felt alive with possibility. Shadow was no longer a wild threat but a partner, a symbol of perseverance, and a living testament to the power of empathy and courage. The crowd, captivated, had begun to record every moment, sharing the story with friends and family. Phones were raised, videos captured, and faces lit with awe. Some of the skeptics even wiped tears from their eyes, moved not just by the physical feat of taming a wild horse, but by the story of redemption unfolding before them. Elias looked across the pen at the observers, his voice carrying softly but with unmistakable strength. "Sometimes, the impossible isn't what others say it is. It's what you believe you can do, even when everyone else doubts you." His words resonated, not just with the crowd, but with the countless viewers who would later see the video, a subtle call to reflection and inspiration. Shadow, sensing the completion of this chapter, stepped closer, lowering his head to allow Elias to place a hand on his muzzle. The gesture was intimate, almost sacred, a culmination of patience, respect, and mutual understanding. He had gone from a feared, untamable stallion to a creature who voluntarily trusted a human being. Every eye in the crowd, young and old alike, felt the emotional impact of this transformation. Elias didn't rush to take credit. He let the moment breathe, knowing the story was bigger than himself. He spoke softly to the audience, almost as if sharing a secret. "Every horse, every challenge, every life, wild or broken, can teach you something if you have the patience to listen. Sometimes, you just need to believe, even when it seems impossible." As the last rays of sunlight shimmered across Shadow's glossy black coat, the crowd erupted in applause. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, and cheers filled the open plains. The ridicule of the past days had completely vanished, replaced with admiration, respect, and an unforgettable sense of wonder. People who had come expecting entertainment or mockery left with hearts lifted and spirits inspired. Elias led Shadow to the edge of the pen, kneeling to adjust the horse's saddle. He looked down at the crowd, smiling gently. "Thank you for believing, or at least for watching. And remember, every life has its shadow, wild, untamed, or misunderstood. You just need patience, courage, and heart to face it." A young girl stepped forward once more, her eyes wide with excitement. "Can I ride him?" she asked timidly. Elias chuckled softly, giving her a reassuring nod. "In time, little one. First, you learn to understand. That's the real magic." Shadow whinnied softly, a sound of gentle approval, as if echoing the sentiment that trust and patience were the true keys to connection. By the time the sun fully set, painting the sky in a cascade of purple and gold, Shadow had transformed not just in behavior, but in spirit. Elias stood beside him, hand on his menere, the bond clear for all to see. It was more than a victory, it was redemption, triumph, and hope made tangible. And as the crowd dispersed, whispers of inspiration spread like wildfire, stories to be shared, videos to be watched, and hearts to be touched. Before leaving the pen, Elias addressed the camera, subtle yet impactful. "If you've been inspired by what we achieved today, share this story. There's power in belief, courage, and connection. And if you want to see more, join us. The journey has only just begun." A soft smile crossed his face, a gentle encouragement that blended naturally into the narrative, leaving viewers motivated and emotionally invested. In that moment, the impossible had been made real. An old rancher had faced doubt, danger, and skepticism, and had risen to the challenge, not just taming a horse, but creating a story of resilience, trust, and heartfelt redemption. Shadow, once wild and feared, now stood as a living testament to what patience, empathy, and courage could achieve. Together, they had proven that no matter how impossible a challenge seems, belief and perseverance can change everything.